counting is still on, and the American people may be losing their patience, at least some of them. Protests have broken out in various parts of the country, with some of those who say, please keep counting, the others who say, don't steal the election. The Trump campaign has filed a series of litigations in various states asking for a recount or a stop of the vote. What does this really mean for the whole process? I have with me today Chidanand Rajghatta, Vishnu Prakash, Rajkamal Rao, and of course Swaminathan Iyer joining us on the discussion to take us through on how to break this down. Chidanand, first, just explain to us why it has to take so long.
Well, first of all, hello from the Banana Republic of United States. That's what it really looks like. The reason it takes so long is because election is a very decentralized process in the United States. They don't have, an election commission like ours. A lot of election laws, devolve on the states. Every state has different laws, and in many cases, every counties have different, rules and regulations about voting. So you have a situation where some states are well prepared for quick counting. Florida was an example. Florida learned from the fiasco in 2000 during the Bush-Gore election. And because Florida also has a large number of senior citizens, they were well prepared for mail-in ballots and counting of mail-in ballots quickly. Other states did not show the same kind of urgency. Everything is a holy mess. And, since you mentioned election commission, I have to tell you, in 2000, during the Bush-Gore fiasco, I actually wrote, and that was the height of, the whole outsourcing debate. The term outsourcing was very new at that time. I said, why don't they outsource the election to India? We conduct it more efficiently. We're not flawless. But right now, Rwanda and Burkina Faso in Africa have better systems than the United States. It's embarrassing that the world's premier country is so ill prepared. And then, of course, now all kinds of disputes have broken out. And as you know, in the United States, the election, this is not just a presidential election. There's also congressional election for Senate, election all the way down the ballot to local bodies. And, in some places, even judges are elected. So the whole judiciary is politicized. So it is an awful mess. And on top of that, you have agitated people on both sides. There's scuffles now breaking out. People are storming into, polling, counting stations. So what can I say? It is really a mess. It is going to take some more days. In many places, the counting is delayed also because there are different rules for different set of ballots. As you know, there are three kinds of voting happened this time because of the pandemic. There were people who voted in person on election day. There were people who voted in person before election day because early voting opened as early as 4 or 5 weeks in some states. And then, of course, there was a mail-in ballot, and the rules regarding mail-in ballot also differ from place to place. In some place, they accept mail-in ballot only as long as it comes in on the day of election. That was November 3 evening, whenever polls closed. In other states, they accept it, 3 days or more after polls close, as long as the ballots are postmarked before end of polling on election day. So it's just messy, right? And right now, I just saw the president Trump has tweeted, stop the count, stop counting votes. And then his another tweet that followed, which Twitter actually flagged, says any vote that came in after election day will not be counted. And that is simply not the rule. The rule is as long as, the votes are cast and sent, is postmarked before end of polling deadline on election day, it should be counted. So, this is a holy mess. It's going to take some untangling. We are expecting that at least, 2 states will be called today. I don't know whether that will resolve the election because Arizona has just announced that they may take 3 more days to finish counting because they're discovering more and more ballots. Those ballots actually, some of them favor, Trump has actually narrowed the margin in Arizona. and Biden has narrowed the margins in Georgia and Pennsylvania, other states. So it's very funny. Trump wants the counting. Trump people want the counting to go on in Arizona, but they don't want it to go on in these 3 or 4 other states where he's losing ground. This is
no. So basically, Trump wants to win. Basically, Trump wants to win one way or the other. Biden is saying, "Hold on, count the votes." But you know, I have a slightly different question, and I want to come to Swami with this question because a lot of people are commenting and asking that, hey, why are so many Indians, for example, so excited about the US elections? You know, Begani Shadi mein Abdullah Diwana is a local saying. But the fact is, the reason everyone is watching is because this is the world's oldest and perceived to be the most powerful democracy. And who becomes the next US president matters in a lot of ways to the world. It impacts the world. It's with a mix of chaos and a bit of horror that we are seeing all of this unraveling. How do you weigh in on this aspect, on why this is so important to watch and see and what's happening right now?
Well, you already said why it's important. I mean, this is the biggest economy, most powerful country in the world. The largest amount of international repercussions arise from here. So, you know, obviously you have to be interested. I mean, we might be less interested in election in England now. In my youth, an English election was followed with enormous interest in India, or even the Queen's visit was regarded as a very, very big thing. But okay, the United States is the most powerful, the most internationally important because of its linkages. So, you know, obviously we need to be involved in what exactly happens there. Over and above that, you know, you can call it a mess. The Americans are used to this. It happened before, as Chidu said. In 2000, you had this particular thing. And while in some ways you can say it's a mess and you can look down on them and say, we have an election commissioner, we manage it. Excuse me, we have to have a UP election in 7 stages with paramilitary forces going everywhere to ensure that the election is not rigged. So, I mean, you know, please, the American system is surely better than that, even if they have some delays. The other thing is, whatever the disputes will take place, as we saw in 2000, the judges come in, they meet, and the whole thing gets settled in a few days at a time. In India, on the other hand, if you remember, 1971 Indira Gandhi election contested, the Allahabad High Court finally ousted her 4 years later in 75. I mean, the United States doesn't suffer from these problems. So yes, the United States prides itself on having this very decentralized form of voting. There is no pressure in America whatsoever to have one centralized election commission. They said, no, we will continue with a highly decentralized thing with different states having different rules. I mean, the United States is not a place in favor of a strong federal government. There is a very strong feeling about states' rights and even at the local level. So as I said, it is true that we are not going to get the election results for a few days, as Chindu said, and there will be lawsuits, and it may take a week or two. But please remember, at the end of it all, the Electoral College itself is only going to meet in the middle of December. And I think much of this will be settled before the Electoral College meets. Beyond that, Trump himself continues to be president till almost the end of January. So in many of these ways, the United States is very different. In other words, there is plenty of time because it's not as though there is going to be a power vacuum. Trump is going to remain president till the end of January. So the United States will sort this out in its own way. And while for many of us it's amusing, as Sidhu says, welcome to the banana republic of the USA, and we can laugh at its various foibles. But as I said, it's an American way, and I see no pressure on here to change the system. It will keep the way it is, because as far as they are concerned, the decisions will be taken well before the deadlines of the Electoral College or the president himself remitting office in January.
Sure. Sure. I mean, the TV news cycle also, you know, pushes these notions. But I think another worrying factor which we should talk about, and let me come to Rajkamal Rao here. We have got a lot of voices today from the US telling us, you know, what they're feeling, seeing and hearing on ground. Mr. Rao, is there a real concern of these protests turning violent, of clashes taking place? this process is taking longer than expected. Will people keep their patience?
Hi, Tamanna. Thank you for having me. Before I answer that question, I want to kind of clarify a couple of points that were already made. So first of all, we are in this situation today. We would not have been in this situation today but for the pandemic. So I've been here for 35 years, and I definitely remember Bush versus Gore in 2000, but that was a very strange instance. We are in this situation today only because of the mail-in ballots. So Mr. Rajghatta talked about early voting. He talked about election day polling and election day voting. If you look at all the states, there has not been any confusion or any conflict about those two buckets of votes. The large majority of the conflict is around the mail-in ballots. And here also we need to be very careful. Only about 5 or 6 states in the country traditionally practice universal mail-in ballots, which is everybody is sent a ballot and they return it for vote counting purposes. That's only a few states, Washington State, Oregon, and a few others. But what the Democrats did this time in response to the pandemic was they pushed for universal mail-in balloting in many states that were not geared to have and to handle this kind of volume. If you go to Pennsylvania, if you go to Michigan, if you go to many of the states where it is contested today, these states do not have the necessary training for the people who process these ballots. They don't have the technology. Even the United States Postal Service did not have the necessary equipment to process these huge volumes. And one last point I want to make. Mr. Rajghatta said somehow that Trump is eager to count the votes in Arizona, but not so eager in Pennsylvania. Let us step back and look at what the Pennsylvania statutes are. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court said that votes that arrive after election day, even if they are not postmarked, should still be counted. This is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So you tell me, on what planet, in what country on the planet can you start counting votes that were cast after election day? So there are issues. So if America did not resort to this mass universal mail-in in many states, then we wouldn't even be here today discussing this as an issue, right? This would have been settled like in 16, like in 12, like in every election that I've watched being here for so many years. The only reason we are in this mess is that many states resorted to universal mail-in ballots, and they were not prepared for it. And now there is a lot of anxiety that some of those ballots are invalid, and that's the reason we are in the courts. And now to answer your question, Tamanna, these kinds of street protests are very strange, right? In 2000, I remember very clearly, there were no street protests. But today, the order of the day in America is to have street protests for everything, right? Whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it is, income inequality or anything, right? This idea of having protests is a very normal thing now, right? So this is new territory, right? I hope it doesn't get into chaos. It is already happening in a couple of places. But that is the reason that even before the election, the day of the election, there were restaurants that were boarding up, fearing that this kind of thing would happen. And one last point before I let you go, Tamanna. We are in the situation largely because of the media and the polling industry. They predicted a 10-point win for Biden. So it was supposed to be 8 to 10 points. Shouldn't have been, if we had listened to the pollsters, Biden would have had it all locked up easily. It was a colossal failure of the polling establishment that said that Biden and Harris would win by 10 points, and we are this close.
But all of that, Mr. Rao, thank you for deciding when to let me go. But to be fair, The polling industry is rhetoric. It doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome. The outcome is still awaited. It's been 3 days. My question is, what are the implications of this long wait? Let me go to Ambassador Vishnu Prakash on the implications of the elongated wait and the fear that there's not going to be a peaceful transfer of power. All signs of it persist right now with President Trump in the seat of power till January, as Swami was explaining, saying again and again, don't count, I'm going to go to Supreme Court, there are legal issues, etc. So we can expect a long drawn out battle, which means this hampers decision making. A fiscal stimulus that's awaited also gets kicked down the road.
Thank you, Tamanna, and I need to thank my previous co-panelists for blaming everybody except God and weather. I think God and weather should also be blamed. The reason there is protests on the streets of the US is that the occupant of the White House declared that he is the winner because he said that the election, a major fraud on the American public is being committed. Now, certainly a major fraud on the American public is being committed, but not by Joe Biden. So here is a situation where if the election goes my way, it's fine. If not, there is something wrong with it. It is the same thing, the big power syndrome, do as I say, not as I do. Pandemic is certainly not the issue, or early voting is not the issue, because if there is early voting and, USA is a major power. They could have figured it out.
Early voting, I said it is mail-in ballots.
Let me complete, Mr. Rao, and thereafter you can come back with your comments. I listened to you very patiently. Do extend me
But you said early voting. You mischaracterized what I said. I did not say early voting. Early voting has been going on for a long time.
Your turn. Okay,
you cannot mischaracterize what I said.
Let Ambassador Prakash finish.
So that is how I look at it. And now the implications, Tamanna, the implications are not as being made out by some of my co-panelists. USA is a major power. USA is the oldest democracy. What US does is watched very carefully by the rest of the world. And the smooth transition of power is the hallmark of a democracy. But when that does not happen, and when there are obstacles being raised or frivolous arguments being raised, there is a matter of concern. Having said that, going to the courts is the right of anybody in a democracy. You have a right to go to the court. You have a right to ask for a recount. But look at how Joe Biden, and I don't hold a brief, I'm a proud Indian citizen, I don't hold a brief for anybody. Joe Biden has been very, very correct. He says, it is not for me or for President Trump to say who is going to be elected. It's for the people of the US. And you need to have patience. So what one was fearing all that. One was fearing that, hoping that it will not happen, but it's a pity that it has happened. As a well-wisher of the US and a friend of the US and a fellow democracy, I do hope that this is resolved very quickly. Last point is that one of my co-panelists scoffed at elections being held in 7 phases in a certain state. I have never known a problem with election being that is anti-democratic. We have to understand that democracy, there is no one recipe or there is no one model.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sure. Look, what works for us, works for us. What works for them, works for them. I'm going to end it here because I think everyone's coming from the right place. And I'm also ending this conversation a little earlier because I have to go to a very big story that's breaking right now. I will just end on a note by thanking all of you for very well elocuted views, but also saying that it's interesting how we've all gotten caught up in this debate and polarization that is impacting the United States. Everyone seems to identify with one side, whichever side there may be. And that's also an outcome of the kind of world we live in, so connected with social media, so connected with all forms of communication. On that note, it's a story that we'll continue to keep tracking because it looks like it'll take time to play out.